There is a particular cruelty that leaves no mark. It is not a blow. It is a shrug. It is being handed off like a parcel no one wishes to sign for, sent up the hill to the one house where every man was certain you would not last the night. They laughed as the cart carried her away. They knew the Duke of Harrogate broke every servant who crossed his gate, and that the savage old mare in his stables had let no hand near her since the war took the young man who loved her. Linnet was meant to be the season's last joke, a girl swallowed by a ruined house and forgotten by spring. Instead, she walked into a freezing stable at the end of the dale, and the one creature that trusted nothing on this earth lowered its great head and chose her. The carrier's cart climbed all morning into a country that seemed to resent visitors. Linnet sat among the sacks of meal and a crate of complaining hens, her hands folded inside the cuffs of a coat that had been good once and was now only brave. She was 23, though the cold and the long years behind her had pressed something older into her face. Knotted into the corner of her handkerchief were 2 shillings and a bent 6pence, the whole of her fortune, and she had counted it so often the coins had worn smooth against her thumb. She did not weep. She had taught herself out of the habit slowly and on purpose, until the tears no longer came, when called. Weeping changed nothing, numbers changed things. Wages the price of bread, the days a body lasts on porridge and river water. The sum this morning was simple. She had nowhere left that would take her but the one place no one else would go. It had not always been so. There had been a warm stone kitchen and a paddock of good hunters, and a father who could read a horse's leg with his hands in the dark, and taught her to do the same before she was 10. She had grown up in the smell of saddle soap and bran mash, her fingers deep in a tangled mane, laughing. She had been a gentleman's daughter once, meant for a small and decent life. Then her father died, between one hard frost and the next, and the men came with their papers. She had learned a great deal that year about how a family is quietly unmade, that a signature can be a knife, that debts can be conjured out of nothing by a patient man who wants your land, that a girl left alone is a door anyone may decide to walk through. By the time she understood, the house was sold and the hunters were sold, and a story had gone out ahead of her into every drawing room in the county. A ruined girl, a girl who had disgraced her father's name. None of it was true. Truth, she had learned, was a poor defense against a lie people would rather believe, so she had cut her own name from herself like a rotten seam and gone into service under a plain one. For years she had drifted between hiring fairs and cold kitchens, a pair of quick hands with no history. She never let a soul see that she could read, that she could cipher a column faster than the master of any house, that she knew which fork belonged to which course. Cleverness in a maid was suspicious, gentility was worse. She kept them buried and kept moving on before questions could grow. This morning, the fair had turned her out again. She had stood in the square from before first light with the rest of the unhired, the wind off the fells cutting clean through them, and one by one the farmers passed her over. At last, a heavy man with a hiring agent's ledger under his arm looked her up and down and smiled in a way she did not care for. "There is one place still wanting hands," he told her, "up at Blackfell. His Grace of Harrogate." The men behind him laughed before he had finished. "Go on up then. Warm work, that. The mad Duke and his devil of a horse." She took the direction because it was the only one offered, and because the alternative was another night under a hedge, with the real cold coming down off the tops. She understood she was being sent as a jest. She understood that every man at the fair expected her back down the hill by nightfall, ruined or simply broken. she decided somewhere on the long gray climb, to give them the satisfaction of neither. The cart lurched to a stop. The carter, who had not spoken 20 words since the town, sat very still with his head tilted, listening. Then Linnet heard it too, thin and far down the empty track on the wind. A sound she could not name, and would never afterward forget. Something caught between a scream and a mourning, high and broken and furious, coming down from somewhere above in the mist. The carter would go no farther for any money. He set her box in the mud, turned his horse in the narrow lane, and left her alone on the track, with the whole gray weight of the fell above her, and that terrible sound folding down through the fog to meet her. The track bent upward through a stand of black dripping firs, and came out all at once upon Blackfell Hall. It was not a house built to be admired. It crouched against the flank of the fell, its stone the color of a bruised sky, half its windows shuttered and blind. Ivy let run rampant across the east front, no smoke rising from the greater chimneys. It was a house in mourning, and had stopped troubling itself over who might know it. The stable range stood apart, a long reach of good stone, in far better repair than the house it served, which told her much about the man who owned them both. A home he had let die, horses he had not. Whatever was broken in him had not reached his animals. The first hopeful thing she had met in a year. She crossed the yard with her box on her hip and her chin level. A knot of grooms had gathered near the far end, keeping careful distance from the last stall, out of which the terrible sound still came in bursts, the crash of a heavy body flung against timber, the shriek of a horse driven past all reason. Not one of them turned to look at her. The man who at last noticed her was the head groom, a broad old fellow named Crake, bandy as a barrel hoop, his face weathered to the grain of oak. He looked at her the way a farmer looks at weather he has learned not to trust. "We sent no word down for a maid," he said. "Whatever they told you in the town, it was a lie told to be rid of you. This is no place for you. Go back down, while there is light to go by." "I was sent for stable work," Linnet said, "not housework. I can begin today." "Stable work," he repeated, flat with disbelief. "We have buried the notion of dainty hands up here, love. The last 3 lads I took on were gone inside a fortnight, and they had been raised to it. I have no patience to be scraping a swooning girl off my cobbles." "Then do not trouble yourself to scrape me off them," she said. "I have never once swooned in my life, and I have cleaned more boxes than you have lads left to lose." He very nearly smiled and hid it. As they stood there, a raw-boned chestnut was led across the yard, fighting his head, the boy on the rope making a poor business of it. Linnet's eyes went to the animal before she decided to let them. "He is short in the near fore," she said quietly. "He favors it because the shoe is set too close to the quick. Your smith has pinched him. It is not temper, it is pain." The old man turned his head slowly and looked at her properly for the first time. Down the yard the chestnut was halted, and the boy lifted the near fore and swore aloud. "Because the girl was right." "And who taught you horses?" said Crake. "A better man than any I have met, at any fair," she answered, and did not give him the name. He rubbed a hand along his jaw. Then a fresh crash rang from the end stall, and the shriek with it, and every man in the yard flinched as one, and not one stirred toward the sound, and Linnet saw the whole shape of the place laid bare. "You want the truth of it," Crake said at last, and there was something almost like pity in his voice now, and beneath it something harder, very like a test. "There is one place open in this yard, and one only, and it stands open because 2 grown men are lamed from it, and no living soul will go near her again. She was the young master's mare." She has not suffered a hand on her since the day he fell abroad. His Grace will not sell her, will not have her shot, and cannot set foot in that stall himself, so she stands in there half mad, and will likely be the death of the next fool who tries her. He nodded down the long row of doors to the end stall where the dark shape heaved against the boards. You want a roof and a wage, that is the whole of what is going. Not a tidy pony for a lady to pet her. Try her, and you may stay. Or turn round now and start back down, and no shame in it. Linnet set her box down on the wet cobbles. She walked the length of the yard, past the grooms, who fell silent as she passed, until she stood at the end stall and looked in over the door. The mare came at her, out of the dark, ears pinned flat, teeth bared, a wall of grief and muscle and screaming, and behind her, every man in the yard drew breath to shout the warning. Then it did not move. The mare's teeth snapped shut a hand's breadth from her face, and Linnet did not so much as blink. She had learned long ago that a frightened animal reads your body before it hears your voice, and that the surest way to be bitten is to flinch. So she stood and let the great head slam against the door beside her, and kept her eyes soft and low, and her hands open at her sides. She did not coo, she did not reach, she said nothing at all. She breathed slow and even, the way her father used to breathe at a shying colt, until it was the loudest thing in the yard. The mare screamed again and wheeled away, and came back and struck the boards, and wheeled again. Linnet waited her out. It took a long time. The light went grayer. Behind her she could feel the grooms watching, could feel Crake willing her to step back, but she did not. She had nothing to step back to. Slowly the storm in the stall began to gutter. The blows came further apart. The screaming dropped to a low, ragged blowing, wet and furious. And then, between one breath and the next, the mare stopped. She stood trembling in the dark of the box, sides heaving, and looked at the girl at her door as though seeing her for the first time. Linnet looked back, let the silence stretch, and then turned her own face a little away, making herself small, and no threat. The mare took one step, then another, and she lowered her great scarred head over the door and pressed her muzzle hard and shaking into the hollow of Linnet's shoulder, and let go a breath that seemed to empty her whole body. No one in the yard moved, no one breathed. Linnet raised one hand, slow, and laid it flat against the mare's cheek. The animal shuddered and did not pull away. "That," said a voice from the archway, "is not possible." Linnet turned her head without lifting her hand from the mare. A man stood in the mouth of the yard, and she knew at once he was the master, because every groom had gone still as stone in the way men do, only for the one who holds their bread. He was younger than the stories had let her expect, though grief had done the work of years on him. Tall and spare and dark, unshaven, dressed like a man who no longer troubled to be looked at, a good coat gone soft at the cuffs. His right hand he held a little against his side, and when the light caught it, she saw the cause. The hand was ruined, the fingers drawn and scarred and half-curled shut, the mark of a ball that had not quite finished its work. It was the hand of a man who could no longer hold a horse. He was not looking at Linnet. He was looking at the mare, and his face was the color of ash. "She has not let a living soul near her in 3 years," he said. "Not the smith. Not Crake." He stopped. "Not me." The last word came out of him cracked at the edge, and he seemed to hate himself for it. He crossed the yard, and the mare's ears went flat at the sound of his uneven step, and she pulled her head from Linnet's shoulder and backed into the dark of the box, and the man stopped as though he had walked into glass. The rejection was plain and public, and Linnet felt it land on him like a blow. Whatever this creature had been to him, she would sooner have a starved stranger off the road. He mastered it. She watched him master it the way she herself had learned to master things, by going cold and still until the feeling had nowhere left to show. "What is your name?" he said. "Linnet," she answered. "Linnet what?" "Just Linnet, your grace." He looked at her then, truly looked, and she felt the old danger of being seen, and made herself dull and plain beneath it. "Crake tells me the fair sent you up to be rid of you," he said. "That you were meant to fail before dark, and give the valley something to laugh at over its ale. Yes, your grace, and you knew it, and you climbed the hill anyway." "I had nowhere else to be," she said. Then he saw her sodden coat, the mud to her knees, the way she had begun to shake with the cold she had refused to feel. Something crossed his face the stories had sworn she would never find there. "You are frozen," he said almost angrily, as though her cold were an insult to him. "Crake, get her inside. Dry clothes, a fire, food, whatever there is." He turned back toward the hall, and stopped, and did not turn round. "The room above the tack house," he said, "not the servants' wing. I want her within reach of the Mare." He walked away into the dark of the house, holding his ruined hand against his side, and did not look back. Crake let out a long breath through his nose, and looked at Linnet with something new in his face, wariness and respect, in equal measure. "3 years he has tried," the old man said low. "You mind yourself, girl. In this house, the things he cannot have are the things he cannot forgive." The room above the tack house was small and clean, and smelled of leather and warm horse, and it was, Linnet thought, standing in the doorway with a borrowed, dry shift over her arm, the finest room she had been given in years. A broad kitchen woman named Bet had built up the little fire and brought a supper on a tray, and now stood with her arms folded, watching Linnet the way the whole house seemed to watch, as though she were a weather no one had forecast. There was a bowl of thick mutton broth, a heel of good bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a mug of small beer, and the smell of it undid something in Linnet's knees. "Eat," said Bet, not unkindly. "You have the look of a girl who has forgotten how." Pride told Linnet to eat slowly, as a lady eats. Hunger told her the truth. She sat, and she ate, and for a while there was nothing in the world but the broth and the bread and the heat of the fire on her wet skirts, and she did not care who watched her do it. When at last she set the spoon down, Bet had gone, and the tray was clean, and Linnet felt the great animal warmth of being full move through her like a tide. Bet came back for the tray and found it scraped clean, and something in her hard face eased. "He was not always like this," she said, apropos of nothing, gathering the crockery. "His Grace." There was a time this house was the loudest in the dale, the pair of them tearing up and down the fells on those horses, laughing fit to frighten the sheep. Then Master Rafe went for a soldier, and his Grace went after him to mind him, and only the one of them came home, and the one that came home left the best of himself out there in the mud. She set the tray on her hip. "That animal in the end stall is the last living thing that carries the boy's smell. Mind how you love it, girl. There is not a soul in this house dares love it, for fear of what it costs to lose it twice." She slept that night without dreaming, which she had not done in longer than she could remember. In the gray of the next morning she was in the yard before the boys, and she went to the end stall, and Juniper, for that was the mare's name, came to her at once, and stood with her head against Linnet's chest, while Linnet worked the worst of the mats from her filthy coat with her fingers, murmuring the low nonsense her father had taught her. which is not words at all, but only the sound of a person who means you no harm. The mare's coat, under the filth, was a deep red bay gone dull with neglect, and there were old-healed scars along her flank that no stable had given her. Whatever the boy and the mare had ridden through together, it had marked them both. She did not hear the Duke come. She only felt Juniper stiffen, and turned and found him at the far end of the row, keeping his distance, watching the mare let a stranger touch what he could not. He did not come closer. He leaned his shoulder against a post, his ruined hand tucked from sight, and for a while he only watched. "They will be waiting at the foot of the hill," he said at last. "The men who sent you, they will have wagered on the hour you come running down it." He tilted his head. "It is nearly noon and you have not run." "I do not intend to," she said. "No," he said. "I did not think you did." A dry thing moved at the corner of his mouth, gone before it could be called a smile. "There is a great deal of the world, Linnet, that arranges a cruelty, and then sits back to enjoy it. My whole acquaintance is made of such people." He looked at the mare. "I have found the surest way to spoil their sport is to decline to play the part they have written for you. You seem to have arrived at the same philosophy by a harder road." "It is cheaper than revenge," she said, "and requires no one's permission." That earned her the ghost of the smile again, more nearly true this time. "She was my brother's," he said without her asking, as though the words had been waiting a long while for a door. "Rafe. Sad, sad. He bought her as a 3-year-old and swore she would make a hunter, and everyone told him she was too much horse and too little sense, and he did not care. He was like that. He looked at nothing. When he fell at Waterloo, they sent her home to me, because there was no one else to send her to, and she came off the boat half wild, and she has been getting wilder ever since." "I could not." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I could not go into the stall. I do not expect you to understand it." "I understand it perfectly," Linnet said quietly. "She reminds you he is dead, and you have had enough of things that remind you." He looked at her for a long, still moment, and the grief in his face was suddenly very naked, and then it shut like a book. "You speak," he said slowly, "too well for a girl sent up from a hiring fair with 2 shillings in her handkerchief." The cold went straight down Linnet's spine. She had been careless, warmth and food in one kind morning, and she had let the seam show. She bent her head to the mare's mane and made her voice flat and dull. "My mother was in service to a good family, Your Grace," she said. "I learned my speech at the keyhole like any other servant's brat. It was a lie she had told before, and told well." She felt him watching the back of her neck, weighing it, and she did not know whether he believed her, and she understood, with a small, cold certainty, that this man noticed everything, and that her secret would not keep forever under a roof like his. Blackfell did not so much run as drift, the way a ship drifts when the man at the wheel has stopped caring where it goes. Linnet saw it in a week. She saw in the feed that was ordered twice and paid for thrice. In the hay brought up from the valley at a price no honest factor would name aloud. In the 2 good carriage horses that had gone from the stalls in the spring and left no line of sale in any book. She saw it the way her father had taught her to see a lame leg, not by looking for the wound, but by watching how the whole animal moved to spare it. The whole estate moved to spare a wound no one had troubled to find, because the master had shut himself in his grief, and the world had come in through the unlatched door to help itself. She said none of it. A stable girl who saw too much did not last. She kept her head down and her hands busy, gentled the mare a little more each day, and added the sums in the dark of her own skull. It was Craik in the end who put the thing in her hands. He found her one evening mending a headstall by lantern light, and stood in the doorway a while, turning his hat, a man working himself up to something. "You have a way with figures," he said. "That business with the shoe. And I have watched you count the feed sacks with your lips going." He set his jaw. "I am a horseman, girl. I can tell you to the day when a mare will fall, and I cannot read a column of accounts to save my soul. Maud, there is something wrong in the books of this place, and has been since the young master died, and I cannot lay my finger on it." Craik looked at her, and the shame of asking sat heavy on him. His Grace will not hear of it. He says, "Let it rot." But it is not his to let rot. It was Master Ralph's before it was his, and the horses are in it. And I will not stand by and watch good blood sold out from under us to line a stranger's pocket. "Bring me the books," Linnet said, before she could tell herself not to. He brought them the next night, 3 heavy ledgers and a candle, and she opened them on the tack-room table, and the old quiet joy of it came up in her like breath after long underwater columns. Order, truth that could be proven. She had not been let be clever in a long while, and it was the only thing that had ever made her feel entirely herself. She worked 3 nights before she took a word of it to the Duke. He was in the cold library where he sat most evenings doing nothing that she could see, a decanter at his elbow, and his ruined hand curled in his lap. He did not turn when she came in. "Your Grace," she said, "someone is robbing you." That got his head round. She laid it out for him. Plainly the way she would show a farrier, a cracked hoof, no flourish, only the fact. The doubled feed orders, the phantom hay, bought. The 2 carriage horses gone with no sale entered, and the forestry money that came in short each quarter, and the single name that stood behind all of it. A man of business who had bought up the notes of half the ruined families in 3 counties, and had lately begun writing to Blackfell, and offering so very kindly to take the troublesome bloodstock off a grieving duke's hands at a fraction of its worth. She turned the letter round on the desk so he could read the signature, and she kept her own face still by an act of will that cost her everything, because she had known the hand before she read the name, and the name was Cassius Dace. She knew that name the way you know the face of the man who held you under the water. It was Dace who had come to her father's house with his patient smile and his papers. It was Dace who had conjured the debts that were never owed. Dace who had bought the ruin of the Ashcombes for pennies and sold the hunters she had raised from foals. Dace who had put the lie about into the county that had made her untouchable. And here he was, again, 3 years and 40 miles away, circling another wounded house, with the very same knife. The Duke read the letter twice. She watched the cynicism in him harden into something colder and far more awake than she had yet seen in him, a man surfacing from deep water. "You have done in 3 nights," he said, "what my steward and my conscience between them could not do in 3 years. He set the letter down. "Why did you not keep your head down, Linnet, and draw your wage and let the ship go down? It would have been safer." "Because I have watched this man work before," she said, and the words were out before she could stop them. He looked up at her sharply. "Where?" And there it was, the edge of the cliff, with the truth on the far side of it. She stepped back from it just in time. "In the last house that let this happen," she said. "There is always a last house, Your Grace. He counts on grief and shame to keep a family quiet while he empties it. He is counting on yours." Ambrose Calder rose from his chair, and, for the first time since she had come to Blackfell, he stood to his full height, and the grieving man was gone, and something older and more dangerous stood in his place. "Then we will give him nothing to count on," he said. "From tomorrow You keep the books of this estate openly. I will have Crake move a desk into the room off the stable, and you will answer to me and to no one else, and the valley may make of that what it likes." "Your Grace," she said, "they will say the most dreadful things. A duke and a stable girl and his private accounts. Let them," he said, and the ghost of Rafe's recklessness moved across his ruined face. "They sent you up here to be broken for their sport. I find I would like them to choke on the sight of you unbroken instead." Lynette gathered the ledgers to her chest. "And Dace," she said. "Write to him," said the Duke, "that the Duke of Harrogate thanks him for his interest, and will be keeping his horses, his timber, and his accounts, all three." She was almost at the door when he spoke again, quietly, and stopped her cold. "Lynette, when you have a moment that is not spoken for, you will tell me how it is that a servant's daughter learned to read a swindler's hand at a single glance. Not tonight, but you will tell me." She did not answer. She carried the books out into the dark, and behind her she heard him say her name once more, softly, as if trying the shape of it, and she stood a moment in the cold passage, with her heart going hard, knowing that the safest thing she had built in a year had just become the most dangerous. The desk came into the room off the stable the next morning, carried on Crake's own shoulder, and by noon, Lynette had made the small cold room her country. She ruled it with a candle, a knife for mending pens, and the 3 ledgers, and within a fortnight she had made the estate confess. Autumn hardened toward winter while she worked. The bracken on the fells went from rust to iron. The mornings came later and colder, and she was always in them, her breath white over the columns, the mare's soft complaint reaching her through the wall whenever she stayed too long from the yard. She began with what could be proven and recovered. The doubled feed orders traced back to a merchant in the valley, a florid man named Tib, who had grown comfortable billing a grieving house that never read what it paid. Lynette walked down to him on a raw morning with the delivery notes copied fair in her own hand, and she stood in his doorway and read them to him, aloud, in front of his own apprentices and 2 farmers come for nails, every doubled sack and every phantom load, in a voice pitched to carry. Tib went the color of a ham. He discovered, he said sweating, that there had been the most regrettable errors, all of them, as it happened, in his own favor, and he pressed £11 into her hand at the door, and begged her not to trouble the magistrate over an honest man's arithmetic. She took the £11. She did not promise anything about the magistrate. A frightened cheat, she had learned, stays honest a good deal longer than a forgiven one. The phantom hay had been billed through a carter who did not exist. The 2 carriage horses had gone in the spring to a buyer whose name meant nothing, until Lynette set it beside 3 other purchases in 3 other counties, and saw that the buyer was a shadow, a hand Dace wore when he did not wish to be seen taking a thing. By the feast of Martinmas, she had clawed back better than £60 in refunds, and stopped leaks that had been draining the place of as much again each quarter. It was not a fortune. Against what she would soon find, waiting in the oldest ledger, it was nothing at all. But it was proof, entered in a fair hand, of a pattern, and a pattern she knew was a rope you could hang a man with if you only gathered enough of it. She laid each recovery before the Duke in the evenings, and something in the house changed by degrees, the way a fever breaks. He began to come to the yard. First to the doorway of her little room, to stand and listen while she read him the day's findings, his ruined hand out of sight. Then to the yard itself, in the mornings, where he would lean on the rail and watch her work the mare and say almost nothing, and the grooms, seeing the master abroad again after 3 years indoors, began to stand straighter and steal less. He did not thank her. She would not have known what to do if he had. Instead, he did the thing that undid her, far more thoroughly than thanks. He treated her as though her judgment were worth more than his own. "Have the eastern paddock drained," he would say, "or would you leave it?" And he would wait and mean the question. When the corn factor came up the hill to renegotiate the winter price, the Duke sat him down in the library and then sent for Linnet and let her do the talking, and watched the factor's face turn from amusement to grievance to grudging respect as the stable girl took his figures apart. When it was done and the factor gone, Ambrose looked at her across the room and said, "My brother would have liked you enormously," and it was the highest thing he owned to give. They fell into a habit of the evenings. She would bring the day's ledger to the library after supper and read him the figures, and he would listen with his head back against the chair and his eyes closed, and correct her on a name or a boundary, and argue with her sometimes for the plain pleasure of it, and she found she argued back. One night she pushed the ledger and a freshly cut pen across the desk to him, to sign a letter to the London solicitors, and watched him look at the pen and not take it, and understood, too late, what she had done. His right hand could not hold it. He had not signed his own name in 3 years. Sowerby had signed for him, and then no one had, because there had been nothing anyone cared to sign. Why? Linnet did not apologize because an apology would have been a pity, and pity would have been the end of it. She drew the ledger quietly back and dipped the pen herself, and said, "Tell me the words. Your Grace and I will set them down, and you will put your mark beneath, and any court in England will honor a duke's mark witnessed by his own steward." And he told her the words and made his crooked mark, and she witnessed it, and it was the first paper to leave Blackfell in his name in 3 years, and neither of them named the size of the thing that had just happened in that quiet room. She had not been valued for her mind in so long that at first she mistook the feeling for fear. It was not fear. It was the strange vertigo of being seen and not punished for it, and she took to it the way the mare took to being groomed, warily, and then greedily, and then as though she had never lived any other way. Bet fed her better. The grooms called her Miss, which no one had ordered them to do. She mended, without meaning to. The hollows filled out of her face. She caught sight of herself one morning in the black window glass and did not for a moment know the woman looking back, because the woman looking back was not afraid. Juniper mended alongside her. The mats came out of the red coat under the daily work of Linnet's fingers and a currycomb, and the great scarred body filled and began to gleam, and the mare, who had let no one near her in 3 years, took to whickering low in her chest at the sound of Linnet's step in the yard before dawn, a sound the grooms swore they had forgotten she could make. Craik watched it and said little, but he began leaving the best of the hay by Juniper's door without being asked. And once, gruffly, he taught Linnet a trick of his own for a poultice, which from Craik was very nearly an embrace. And in the deep of it, working late one night with the wind walking on the roof, she found the thing that turned the whole warm world cold again. It was a mortgage. It sat in the oldest of the ledgers, folded small, a debt raised against the home farm and the water meadows, £3,000 at a hard rate of interest, the greater part of Blackfell's good land pledged against it. It had been raised, the paper said, by the late Master Ralph himself, in the black season after Waterloo, when the house was drowning in grief, and the steward, Sowerby, had the run of an estate whose master could not leave his library. And it had been bought up, note and interest both, by a man of business in the valley, and it fell due at the new year, and if it were not paid in full on the quarter day, the holder might force the sale of the land to satisfy it. Linnet sat very still with the paper in her hand and did the sum she did not want to do. The estate could not pay it. She had recovered pounds where thousands were owed. She read the thing 3 times over, hunting for the flaw, the way she hunted a lame step, because there was always a flaw. Shine. Dace's cleverness was real, but it was the cleverness of a man who had never once been checked, and unchecked cleverness grows careless. The interest was usurious, but lawful. The security was properly drawn. The witnessing was in order. It was, she thought with something close to despair, a perfect snare, and she had found it far too late to spring it. Dace had not been picking at the edges of Blackfell out of greed alone. The feed and the hay and the vanished horses had been a way of bleeding the place, slowly weak, while the real snare lay folded in an old book, waiting for the new year, when he would come up the hill smiling and take the whole of it, land and house and horses and all, for the price of a debt no one living had truly meant to owe. She looked at the signature at the foot of the mortgage. Rafe Calder, in a hand that sloped hard to the right. And something in her went quiet and cold and clear, the way it did when a column would not add, because she had seen Rafe Calder's hand not an hour before, in the flyleaf of a book of horse pedigrees the young master had kept, and the R was made another way, entirely. She did not go to the Duke that night. She sat with the two signatures side by side in the candlelight until the candle guttered, and let herself understand what she was looking at, and let herself be afraid of it, because she had learned long ago that the things Dace signed his victims' names to were the things that could put a man on the gallows, and she was holding one in her hand. He came on a gray morning, 3 days before the quarter day, and he did not come himself. He sent his knife ahead of him. The attorney arrived in a hired chaise, a narrow-pressed man named Grice, with a black coat and a leather case, and a way of looking at a room as though pricing it for sale. Bet showed him into the hall, because there was no help for it, and he stood turning slowly on the flags, taking the measure of the shuttered house, and when Linnet came through with the ledgers under her arm, his eyes went over her once, quick and thorough, the way a man counts coin. "I am here to see His Grace," Grice said. "Upon a matter of business, he will wish to see me alone. Fetch him, girl, and then make yourself scarce." "His Grace keeps no business from me," Linnet said. "You may say it twice or say it once. It is all one to me." Grice's smile did not reach any part of his face that mattered. "We shall see," he said. Ambrose received him in the library, and Linnet came in behind and set herself at the side table with the ledgers, and did not make herself scarce, and Grice noted it, and let it pass, and opened his case. The matter was, he said, a regrettable one, a debt of the late Master Rafe Calder's long outstanding, now come due. His client had carried it these 3 years out of delicacy, out of respect for a house in mourning, but a debt was a debt, and the new year was the new year, and £3,000 with its interest must be found by the quarter day, or the security must, alas, be realized. He laid the copy on the desk and turned it, gently, so the Duke could see the ruin written there. He wished it understood only the instrument. His client was the soul of reason. Indeed, his client had authorized him to convey a kindness. Were His Grace to find the sum an embarrassment, Mr. Dace would take the bloodstock and the home farm in settlement, and cry the balance quits, and no word of the difficulty need ever trouble the newspapers. He said it all in the mild, regretful voice of a physician describing an amputation, and every word was chosen to remind a grieving man how easy it would be to simply let go and stop fighting. Linnet had heard the voice before, in another library, in another county. It was the voice Dace taught his men. It had emptied her father's house of everything but the echoes. It was very neatly done. Linnet watched the Duke's face and saw the old grief rise in him, the pull to let it rot, to let them have it, to sink back into the dark where nothing could be lost, because nothing was held. She spoke before he could. "Tell Mr. Dace," she said, "that his kindness is noted and declined." Gryce turned to her with the patience of a man addressing a chair that had presumed to have an opinion. "This is a matter for the principals," he said, "not for the help." "I keep the books of this estate," Linnet said, "and I have read that mortgage more closely, I think, than the man who drew it." She rose, and she did not hurry it. "Tell me, Mr. Gryce, does your client still favor the quarter-day for his callings in, or has he grown bold enough now to move them about as it suits him? Does he still buy his debts through a man who is not there, so the ruined family never learns whose hand is at their throat until the morning he comes to collect?" Gryce's pen stopped moving. She had described his master's method to his master's own attorney, item by item, and he understood in that moment that whatever this woman was, she was not the help. "Tell your client, the debt will be answered on the quarter-day. And tell him the Duke of Harrogate is no longer a house in mourning, and grief is done keeping us quiet." Something flickered in the attorney's pale eyes. He gathered his paper slowly and closed his case, and rose, and it was at the door that he turned and did the thing she had dreaded since he came, because Gryce had not risen through Dace's service by failing to look twice at a stable girl who spoke like a magistrate's daughter. "Have we met?" he said softly, studying her face. "You have a look about you. Some house I have visited." He let it hang, watching what it did to her. "No matter. It will come to me. It always does." He bowed to the Duke and let himself out, and the wheels of the chaise ground away down the frozen drive, and the library was very quiet. "You should not have let him see you care," Ambrose said at last, not from anger. It was almost gentle. "I know it," she said. Her hands, she found, were not quite steady, and she pressed them flat to the ledgers. "He knows me, Your Grace. Or he will, by the time he reaches the bottom of the hill. And when he tells his master what he suspects, it will not be a mortgage they use against you. It will be me." Ambrose was quiet. Then he crossed the room, and he did not touch her, but he stood near enough that she felt the warmth of him, and when he spoke, his voice had gone low and even, and certain, in a way, it had not been since she came. "Then it is time you told me," he said, "what it is you are so afraid they will find." He looked down at her. "Not so that I may decide what to do with it. So that when they throw it in the light, I already know its shape, and it cannot be used to make me flinch." He waited. "Whatever it is, Linnet, it will not turn me against you. I have been turned against enough for one life." He said it plainly, without appeal, a man laying down a thing he had carried a long way. And Linnet, who had kept her own name locked in her chest for 3 years against exactly the moment someone would use it to strip everything from her, felt the lock give a little. She had never in all that time had a soul stand between her and the cold and simply say, "Tell me," so they cannot use it to hurt you. It was the most dangerous offer anyone had ever made her, because she wanted so badly to take it. She looked up at him, and the truth crowded so hard against her teeth that it hurt. And outside, the first hard flakes of the winter's real snow began to come down past the tall black windows, and she opened her mouth to tell him, and from the yard, thin and terrible and rising, came the sound of Juniper screaming. The mare was down. Linnet knew it before she reached the stall, knew it from the pitch of the scream and the thud of a heavy body rolling against the boards, and she was through the door and into the straw, with her skirts already soaked, before Crake had got a lantern lit. Juniper lay on her side, neck stretched, lips peeled back, and as Linnet watched, she heaved herself up and swung her great head round to bite at her own flank, and went down again, hard, groaning. "Colic," Linnet said. "Nolus." The word came out flat and fast. "She has twisted her gut, or she is close to it. Crake, we walk her." Now we do not let her lie down and roll, or she will be dead by morning. Get a halter on her. No man in the yard would go in." She had known it, and she did not waste breath on it. She got the halter herself, dodging the head, and hauled the mare up by main force and will, and Juniper, half mad with the pain, came up, because Linnet made her come up, and then the two of them were out in the falling snow, going round and round the yard in the lantern light, the mare lurching and trying to buckle and Linnet dragging her on, talking to her the whole time in the low nonsense that meant no harm. "Keep on, my girl, keep on. You do not get to leave him, to walk." She did not hear Ambrose come. She only knew he was there when a second hand took the halter rope below hers. His good hand, the left, and his shoulder came in against the mare's, and he was walking on the other side of that great heaving body in the snow, with his face like a man who had walked into the sea. "You will do no good here," she said, not cruelly. "Your hand." "I have one that works," he said. "Tell me what to do," and because there was no time to be gentle with his pride, and because the mare was dying between them, she told him. "Keep her up. Keep her walking. When she tries to go down, you put your weight here and you swear at her. She is contrary. She answers to spite." And Ambrose Calder, who had not set foot in this stall in 3 years, put his weight against his dead brother's horse, and swore at her, low and steady. "Keep on, you wretched animal! Keep on!" And Juniper laid one ear back at the sound of him, and kept on. The night had no bottom to it. They lost all sense of the hour. The lantern threw their two shadows huge and staggering across the snow, the mares between them, and round the yard they went, past the black mouths of the empty stalls, past the water troughs skinned with ice, past Crake standing white-faced at the gate with the other men, none of whom would come in, all of whom watched. Twice the mare tried to buckle and go down to roll, and twice they hauled her up between them, Linnet on the halter, and Ambrose's shoulder driving into the great ribs, and the second time the pain took her, she screamed and struck out, and a hoof caught Ambrose across the shin, and he went down in the snow and got up again without a word and put his shoulder back where it had been. Linnet drenched her again at the turn of the hour, forcing the horn between the clenched teeth, the warm mash running down both their sleeves. She did not know if it was working. She knew only that a horse which lies down and rolls with a twisted gut is a dead horse, and that the one thing she could do was refuse, hour upon hour, to let this one lie down. They walked her through the black middle of the night. Linnet drenched her with a warm mash of bran and linseed oil, forced down with a horn, and they walked, and the snow came down and melted on the mare's steaming coat. And somewhere in the smallest hour the great body gave a shudder and a rolling groan, and the thing inside her turned and eased, and the mare stopped, and stood, and dropped her head, and blew out a long wet breath, and lived. Linnet leaned her forehead against the mare's neck and shook. They put her back in a deep, fresh bed near dawn, warm and drowsing, out of danger, and the two of them stood in the trampled snow of the yard in the gray light, filthy and soaked and emptied out, and neither of them able yet to go in. "I was beside him," Ambrose said. Linnet went still, at Waterloo. "People say it kindly, that he fell, as though he lay down in a field. He did not lie down. We were in the same charge. He had no more business in a cavalry charge than a boy at a fair, and I had spent 2 years and every favor I owned, trying to keep him from a commission, and he bought one behind my back, because he could not bear to be safe while other men were not. He was like that, so I went. I could not stop him going, so I went to be beside him to bring him home. He looked at his ruined hand, open now, palm up in the falling light. His horse went down and he was under it, and I turned back for him. I had his sleeve, I had my hand in his sleeve, ta! And a saber came down across the reins, and the fingers. And I lost my grip, that is all, I lost my grip, and the tide of it carried me on, and carried him under, and I came home with a hand that cannot close. He had never said it aloud. She understood that, watching him. 3 years he had carried the whole of it, sealed up behind the ruined hand and the shut-house, and it came out of him now not in a flood, but in pieces, dragged, each one costing him, because the snow and the long night and the living warmth of the Mare between them had at last worn through to the place where he kept it. He lowered the hand. I went to mind him, and in the one moment it was asked of me, I could not keep hold. I have told myself the story 1,000 ways, he said, that if the hand had been whole, that if I had turned back a moment sooner, that if I had been a harder man and let him buy his commission and go and die alone as he chose, I would at least have my hand and my house and some use left in the world. There is no way of telling it that does not end with him, under the horses and me, on the boat home. He wiped his face with the back of the ruined hand. So I stopped telling it. It is a poor guest, a story like that. It empties every room it is let into. The silence after was very large. Lynette did not tell him it was not his fault. She had been offered that coin herself in her own ruin, and knew it for the counterfeit it was. Pity was a way of putting a thing down and walking away from it clean. She did not pity him. She crossed the space between them instead, and she took his ruined hand in both of hers, the hand he had hidden from her since the day she came, the hand he hid from everyone, and she held it. The drawn fingers and the scar and the cold of it, held it the way you hold a thing that is not shameful, and she did not flinch. You did not fail to hold him, she said. You held him until a blade made you let go. There is a name for a man who rides into a charge he was spared for the sake of a brother who would not be spared. It is not failure. She turned it over in hers. This is the shape of you keeping hold as long as any man on earth could have. He stared at the hand in hers as though she had shown him something he had been looking at wrongly his whole life. No one had touched it since the surgeon. He had seen to that. He kept it gloved, kept it turned away, kept it in his lap, beneath desks and behind his back in doorways, the daily labor of a man hiding the proof of his one great failure. And here was a girl, holding it in the cold and the wet, as though it were only a hand, as though the drawn fingers and the dead white scar were not a verdict, but simply the map of a bad night and a brother loved past sense. He looked at her, and 3 years of winter went out of his face, and he lifted his other hand, the whole one, and touched her cheek where the Mare's foam and the melting snow had streaked it, and neither of them moved, and the whole ruined house seemed to lean in around them in the dawn. She almost told him then. She felt the name rise, her true name, the last thing between them, and she wanted more than she had wanted anything to lay it in his open hand beside the other truths of that terrible night. And she did not, because down in the valley a narrow man in a black coat was even now. She knew it in her bones, remembering exactly where he had seen her face before, and a thing spoken aloud could be taken and used, and she would not hand Dace the weapon before she had first drawn his teeth. Soon she said instead against his shoulder, I will tell you everything soon, when it is safe. And Ambrose, who had learned that night what it was to be held on to, let her have the secret a little longer, and held her instead. Cassius Dace came up the hill on the morning of the quarter-day in a black lacquered carriage with his attorney beside him, and he came certain he had already won. Lynette watched from the window of the little room as he climbed down, and stood a moment surveying Blackfell, and the years fell away, and she was 20 again, and standing at a different window watching this same man survey a different house he meant to eat. He had not changed. He was smooth and gray and unhurried. A patient man, a man who had learned that grief and shame will do a swindler's work for him if he is only willing to wait, and he had waited. And now it was the new year, and he had come to collect. She had rehearsed this morning in her head so many times across 3 years that living it had the quality of a dream returned to. In the version she had carried out of her father's house, she was always too late and too small. A girl of 20 with no weapon but the truth, and no one who would hear it. She had learned since then that the truth is not a weapon at all, until someone has taken the trouble to load it. She had spent all winter loading it. Her hands, resting on the ledgers, were perfectly steady, and she noted the fact with a distant interest, as though watching another woman entirely, a woman who was not afraid of Cassius Dace, and wondered when exactly she had become her. They received him in the library. Ambrose sat behind the desk. Linnet stood at his shoulder with the ledgers, and she saw the exact moment Dace's eye fell on her, and Grice leaned in and murmured the thing he had remembered on the long road down the hill, and she saw the pleasure of it move across Cassius Dace's face, like sun on cold water. "Why," he said, "Miss Ashcombe. I had heard his Grace had taken in a stable girl. No one told me she was an old acquaintance of mine." Ambrose did not move. "You are mistaken," he said. "I employ no one of that name." "Do you not?" said Dace, and smiled, and sat, without being asked. "Then allow me the pleasure of an introduction, Your Grace, for you are keeping a viper closer than you know. This is Miss Honora Ashcombe, of Ashcombe Grange in the county I came from. Her father died owing more than the estate could bear, and this one, the daughter, left under something of a cloud. A scandal, you understand. Debts and a broken engagement, and worse besides, or so the county said." He spread his hands. "I only mention it because you seem a man who values his good name, and there is not a drawing-room in England that would not shut its doors to a duke who kept a disgraced woman under a false name to handle his private affairs. He let that sit. It would be a pity. Such things reached the newspapers so easily." He was enjoying himself now. He leaned back and let his gaze travel the shabby grandeur of the room, the good bones under 3 years of neglect, pricing it. "I am not an unreasonable man, Your Grace," he said. "I take no pleasure in a hard bargain. Sign me the home farm and the bloodstock, quietly, between gentlemen, and I will carry Miss Ashcombe's little history to my grave, and you may keep your stable girl and your good name both. Refuse me, and pay what you cannot pay, and the whole of England will know by Lady Day what manner of woman keeps your books and shelters beneath your roof under a name that is not her own." He smiled at Linnet. "I did try to be kind to you once, my dear. I let you leave your father's house with the clothes on your back. Not every man would have. There it was, the real knife, laid on the table beside the false one. Pay the 3,000 you cannot pay, or sell me the land and the horses for a song, or I will ruin the pair of you with the truth of who this woman is." Linnet felt the old shame reach up for her throat, the shame that had kept her silent and moving and no one for 3 years, and she felt Ambrose about to rise and answer it with his fists, which was what Dace wanted, a duke made to look a brute over a servant. She put her hand flat on the desk, and she stepped forward, and she answered it herself. "Everything you have said of me is a lie," she said, and her voice did not shake, and that surprised no one more than her. "You conjured my father's debts out of paper and patience, the way you conjured his Grace's. You bought our ruin for pennies, and sold the horses I raised, and put the scandal about yourself so that no one would take in the girl who had watched you do it. I know. I was there. I have spent 3 years believing you had beaten me." She lifted the mortgage from the ledger and laid it in the light. "But you made one error, Mr. Dace, that you have never had to answer for, because the families you ruined were too broken to read what you signed in their names." She set beside the mortgage the flyleaf of a book, torn clean, a young man's signature sprawled across it. Rafe Calder died at Waterloo. "In the June," she said. "This mortgage against Blackfell is dated the September after." She let the room understand it. "You forged a dead man's hand to raise a debt against his brother's grief. Here is his true signature. Here is yours, upon it. And copies of both, and of every doubled order and phantom sale I have drawn out of these books this winter, are 3 days gone to his Grace's solicitors in London, and to the magistrate at York, with a letter, against exactly this morning." The library was so silent she could hear the fire. Gryce had gone the color of tallow. He had drawn mortgages for Cassius Dace for a long time, and he knew, as every attorney knew, that the forging of a name to a deed was not a matter of ruin and newspapers. It was a matter of the assize court and the rope. Gryce set his case down on the floor very quietly and took one step away from his master, and then another, the instinctive shuffle of a man putting distance between himself and a thing about to be struck by lightning. He had drawn that mortgage. His hand was on it too. Linnet watched him make the calculation an attorney makes, and saw which way it fell. "If it please your Grace," Gryce said, to no one, "to the room, I acted throughout upon my client's representations, and had no knowledge of any irregularity as to dates. It was the sound of a rat testing whether the ship was truly going down. It was going down." Dace's smooth gray composure held for one moment longer, and then it cracked, all at once, into something old and cornered and afraid. "You cannot prove the date," he said, and it was the voice of a man reaching for a rail that was no longer there. "The muster rolls prove the date," said Ambrose, rising, now slowly to his full height, and his voice was terrible, for how quiet it was. "The regiment proves the date. My brother's grave proves the date." He came round the desk. "Every man who fell in that field has a use at last, sir. They will hang you." Dace stood. He looked at the papers, and at the woman he had ruined and failed to keep ruined, and at the Duke he had taken for a broken thing, and he understood that he had walked up the hill into a trap laid all winter in a cold room by a stable girl he had not thought worth the counting. "I will contest it," he said. "I will drag the name Ashcombe through every court in the land. I will make her sorry." She opened her mouth. "You will run," Linnet said quietly, "because you have always run, 1 county ahead of the last house you emptied. Only this time there is a letter at the magistrate's with your name upon it, and there is nowhere in England left to run to that will not have heard it by the spring." Ambrose pulled the bell. "Bet will show these gentlemen out," he said. "If they are still upon my land in the quarter of an hour, Crake will loose the yard dogs, and I will account it no crime to have set them on 2 men who came to rob a grave." Cassius Dace went down the hill in his black carriage a great deal faster than he had come up it, and he did not look back, and Linnet stood at the window and watched the carriage grow small on the White Valley Road until it was gone. The man who had held her whole family under the water reduced at last to a speck fleeing across the snow. And she found. She was not triumphant. She was only for the first time in 3 years set down, put on solid ground, unafraid. Crake came and stood at the window beside her, and watched the carriage dwindle, and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "Your father would be proud, I should think, of whoever taught you your figures." and Linnet found she could not answer him, because the whoever was her father, and the old groom had, without knowing it, laid his hand on the bruise and the blessing, both. Then she remembered what she had said aloud in that room, in front of Grice, in front of the Duke, in front of the world, and the ground moved again under her feet. She had told them her name. She was gone from the library before the carriage had reached the valley floor. She went to the little room off the stable, and she began, with hands that had learned long ago how to do this quickly, to put her few things into the box she had carried up the hill. The dry shift, the mended gloves, 2 shillings and a bent 6pence. She had never spent, because a woman who has been poor keeps the shape of the fear even after the fear is gone. Her hands knew the work too well. Fold and press flat and fit the corners, the whole quiet science of leaving that she had learned in years of back kitchens and hiring fares, of reading a room, and knowing the morning she would be moved on before anyone said the words. She had thought she had left that girl behind her in the autumn. She found her waiting, patient, in the muscles of her own hands. That was the cruelty of it. You could climb all the way up a hill into warmth and worth, and a man who looked at your ruined places without flinching, and a single word in a cold library could send you straight back down to the person you had been at the bottom. Packing a box, counting the coins, making yourself small and portable and gone. She worked fast because if she worked fast she would not have to feel it, and she had almost finished when Ambrose filled the doorway. "What," he said, "are you doing?" "Sparing you," she said, and did not turn round. You heard him. You heard all of it. Honora Ashcombe, of the ruined Ashcombes, the disgraced girl, the scandal, the false name. It does not matter that the scandal was his lie. A lie of that kind does not wash out. She folded the shift smaller than it needed to be. You are a duke. You cannot keep me here and be anything but a joke, or worse. I have watched a name destroy a house once. I will not stand in this room and watch it destroy a second. Not yours. Not when the mending of it has only just begun. She fastened the box. I was useful to you, and I am glad of it. I found the knife before it fell. Let that be the whole of what I was, and let me go down the hill before the county starts up its talk. You have it all worked out, he said. I am good with sums. Sit down, Ambrose said. I will not, she said. If I sit down, I will not have the courage to stand up again. He crossed the room. He did not take the box from her, which she would have fought. He took her hands off it, gently, the drawn, ruined fingers of his right hand closing as far as they could around hers, and he waited until she looked at him. You think, he said, that I have kept you here because you are useful. Because you found the mortgage, and read the swindler's hand, and saved the Mare, and set my house to rights. He shook his head slowly. Linnet, Honora. Whatever your name is, I will learn to say the right one. I did not begin to live again this winter, because my accounts came right. A clerk could have brought my accounts right. He lifted her hands. I began to live again because a half-starved girl walked up a hill she had every reason to walk away from, and stood still while a savage thing screamed in her face, and would not run, and would not lie down, and would not be broken to suit the convenience of cruel men. He held her eyes. That is not a thing you did for me. That is a thing you are, and a name cannot ruin it, because a name is not where it lives. He was not finished. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed in the yard, which he had. I have thought about this a great deal, he said, more than I have thought about anything since I came home, and I have thought about it the way you taught me to read a ledger, hunting for where it does not add. And here is where it does not add. Honora, you keep telling me what I stand to lose by keeping you. The name, the county, the talk. You have made a very thorough column of my costs. You have not entered a single thing on the other side. You have not once asked what I lose if you go down that hill. He let the words stand. I had a brother who filled a house with noise, and he died, and I let the house go silent for 3 years and called it grief, when the truth is it was cowardice. It was easier to feel nothing than to risk feeling that again. You walked into the silence and were not afraid of it. I am asking you not to hand it back to me. The county, she said, and her voice had gone unsteady at last. The talk, Dace will not be the only one. Let them talk, he said, and something of his brother came up in him, reckless and warm. I am a duke, Linnet. I have spent 3 years letting the world decide I was a broken man in a shut-house, and it cost me everything and gained me nothing, and I am done handing the world the pen. They may whisper about a stable girl until they are hoarse. They cannot whisper about the Duchess of Harrowgate. They will have to stand when she comes into a room. They will have to bow in the street. And the county that shut its doors on Honora Ashcombe will have to open every one of them and call her Your Grace, and choke on it. She stared at him. You cannot mean it. I cannot kneel, he said. The leg is sound enough, but I find I have no gift for it, and you would only tell me to get up before I ruined my one good pair of breeches. So I will not kneel. He kept hold of her hands. The mare chose you the first hour you came. I have never in my life agreed with that animal about anything. I find I agree with her about this stay. Not as a keeper of my books, as the keeper of the whole of it. Marry me, and let us give this ruined valley the most magnificent scandal it has ever had to bow to. The snow had stopped outside. In the stall along the wall, Juniper shifted in her deep warm bed, and blew out a long contented breath, as though she had understood, and perhaps she had, being the one who chose first. Linnet let go of the box. She reached up and laid her hand against the scarred side of his face, the way she had laid it against the mare's. The first hour, careful and unafraid, and offering no threat and no pity, only herself. Then say my name, she said. The true one. I have not heard it spoken kindly in 3 years. Honora, he said low, like a thing he had been given to keep. He said it as though it cost him something to give it back to her, as though he understood that a name spoken with contempt for 3 years could only be healed by being spoken once. Exactly right. It was spoken exactly right. And she kissed him. In the cold, small room that smelled of leather and warm horse, with 3 years of winter breaking apart around them both, and the last thing between them gone at last into the light. They were married in the small gray church at the foot of the fell, on a bright, hard morning at the very end of winter, with the snow still lying blue in the shadows of the walls, and the first green needling up along the sunward banks. There was no London in it. There were no aristocratic guests, no bishop, no crush of carriages. Craik stood up as witness in a coat, so old it had come round to fashionable again, and wept without troubling to hide it. Bet held the ring until it was wanted, and glared at anyone who looked as though they might spoil the moment. The grooms and the yard boys filled the pews on one side, scrubbed pink, and a scattering of tenants filled the other, come up out of curiosity and staying out of something warmer. Linnet did not wear white. She wore a deep green riding habit, the color of the summer fells, made for her in the town by a dressmaker who had, 3 years before, refused her a fitting middig. The dressmaker had come herself to deliver it, and had not quite been able to meet her eye. When the vicar asked, and Nora Ashcombe said, "I will," in a clear voice that carried to the back of the little church, half the county heard the sound of a joke that had been made at her expense turning, quietly and completely, into something else. The news went down the valley and did not stop there. It went to the market town, where a hiring agent had once sent a friendless girl up a hill for sport, and the agent found he could not tell the story any more without the ending going wrong in his mouth. It went to the county. Linnet had fled, where the doors that had shut on a ruined girl were discovered, to their owner's embarrassment, to have shut on a duchess. And it went to a magistrate at York, where a black case of papers concerning a man named Cassius Dace had lately been opened with great interest, and where it was understood that the gentleman himself had taken ship, and that the sea was welcome to him. Spring came up the dale slowly, and then, all at once, the way it does in the high country. The becks ran loud with snowmelt. The fells went from iron to green to a haze of purple as the heather woke. The shutters came down off the windows, one by one. Smoke rose from the great chimneys again, and light, and once, scandalously, the sound of a duke laughing. Linnet kept the books still at a good desk now, in a warm room in the house itself, though she was as often in the yard as in the study, for a duchess who could not read a horse's leg was of no use to anyone. Under her hand and Craik's the stable filled again with good blood, and the home farm that Dace had meant to steal was drained and sown, and the estate that had drifted for 3 years came round into the wind and began at last to run. And in a paddock below the house, in the long gold light of an evening in May, an old red bay mare grazed with a leggy dark foal at her side. Juniper had been carrying it since the last wild summer before ever Linnet came, got by the young master's own stallion in a season when no one at Blackfell was minding which horse ran with which, so that the foal that dropped in the spring was the last of Rafe Calder in the world. And Ambrose stood at the paddock rail in the evening and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he ducked through the rail, and he crossed the grass, and the old mare lifted her head and watched him come and did not shy, and he laid his good hand, and then, slowly, the ruined one, the one that could not close, flat against her warm neck, and she let him, and stood, and leaned into it. Linnet watched from the rail, and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying, and this, too, was a kind of loving, to stand by and let a man have back a thing he had thought lost for good. Rafe would have laughed at all of it. She thought the Duchess in a riding habit doing sums at the kitchen table, the fearsome Duke of Harrogate gone soft over a fall, and somehow the thought of the dead boy laughing had stopped being a wound, and turned into something nearer to company. She thought, sometimes, of the girl in the cart with 2 shillings and a bent 6pence, climbing a hill toward a house where every man swore she would not last the night. She had lasted. The joke that was meant to end her had, instead, been the door out of the dark, though no one who arranged it could ever be made to believe it, and she had long since stopped wishing they would. Ambrose came back to the rail and stood beside her, his shoulder against hers, the foal wheeling and bucking across the gold grass, the mare grazing on, the whole ruined valley gone green and living around them. "The world sent you up here to be broken," he said, watching the foal. "It has been very poorly repaid for its trouble." Linnet leaned her head against him. "It should have chosen its stable girl more carefully," she said. And out in the last of the light, the old mare, who had trusted nothing left on the earth, lipped at her foal's mane and let the ruined hand rest on her neck, and every creature in that green fold of the fells, at long last, had somewhere it was allowed to be. If Lynette and Ambrose winning back everything the world took from them left you glad you stayed to the end, you are exactly the sort of person this channel is for. There is nothing on earth quite like watching a quiet, unbroken soul walk straight through the people who wrote her off and come out the far side, wearing a crown they cannot take back. If this story warmed you tonight, give it a like so that more people find their way to it, and subscribe and ring the bell to be here for the next one. Tell me in the comments, which moment did you love the most? The hour the Mare chose her, the night they saved Juniper in the snow, or the morning Dace went back down the hill with nothing? I read every one. Stay warm out there, and I will see you in the next story.